There's a romantic comedy movie coming out soon. It's called Most Eligible Bachelor. According to Wikipedia, it's an Indian-made film. It'll be out about June 19th. I doubt I'll be seeing it. I don't recognize any of the names of any of the actors. I don't know who the director is. I don't know what it's rated. And all the acting is done in the Telugu language, which means I'd either need to brush up on my Telugu or be prepared to read a lot of subtitles. But the title is intriguing, isn't it? Most Eligible Bachelor. What makes a man most eligible? Well, many would say wealth, and certainly money does offer a sense of security. But far more important is a man's character. If I had a daughter, I would much rather she marry a very good man who was poor than a very rich man who was morally challenged. Well, in the book of Ruth, we meet a man who had both. Boaz was the most eligible bachelor in all of Bethlehem. He was wealthy, he was generous and kind. Any girl in Bethlehem would consider him a good potential marriage partner. But he'd never given his heart to another until he met the girl of his dreams, Ruth the Moabite. And their story is one of drama and romance, a real-life drama unfolding in ancient times. It's good stuff, and it's real stuff. And as we pick up the story, Naomi and Ruth are poor widows living in Bethlehem. And Ruth has returned from gleaning in the fields, and she's had just an amazing day. The landowner himself took notice of her and had lunch with her. And she was able to glean some 30 pounds of grain, an amazing amount. And so Naomi gets really excited that the landowner is none other than Boaz, a relative who might save the day as their kinsman redeemer. We see the story in Ruth 3, verse 1. One day Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley in the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Well, when we look at this plan with modern eyes, it just has disaster written all over it. On a superficial reading, it looks like a meddlesome mother-in-law decides to hook up her daughter-in-law with a rich man who may be old enough to be her father. And Ruth is instructed to prepare herself for this meeting by taking a bath, putting on perfume, and dressing in her very best clothes. Well, the bath was probably what we would call a sponge bath, since only the wealthy had anything close to what we call a bathtub. And bathing was not something that people really did back then. I can imagine that the human body being what it is, people in ancient times could develop a rather pungent odor. Well, Boaz's foreman told him that Ruth had been out there the entire day gleaning in the fields, and she was a very hard worker. So day after day, Ruth is out in the fields in the summer sun doing manual labor in the dirt. And day after day, she doesn't bathe. But neither does anyone else. It's just how it was. Well, I enjoy riding my bike around the neighborhood, and I know it's not intense exercise, but it's enough to get my heart pumping and make me all sweaty. And when I get home, Judy will have nothing to do with me. She won't touch me. She won't get near me. A couple of times I've tried to trick her. I'll come home from riding my bike and I'll say, "I need a hug," and hold out my arms. And Judy, being the trusting person that she is, moves in to meet my embrace. But then she catches herself. Before she actually makes contact, she says, "You're all sweaty. I'm not touching you." Well, back in Bible times, being all hot and sweaty was evidently not a big deal. Everybody was hot and sweaty, and nobody was taking daily baths. But Naomi tells Ruth to take a bath. This is truly a special occasion. Ruth would immediately know that Naomi was up to something. This was out of the ordinary. Their attitude about baths was kind of like the American Old West, where a man would take a bath every Saturday night, whether or not he needed it. Well, not only was she to bathe, Ruth was told to put on some perfume. Well, in that day, perfume was used mostly to mask body odors. But Naomi tells Ruth to bathe and use perfume. Now, Ruth must have thought, that's just kind of crazy. A bath and perfume? But if you say so. And then Naomi told her to put on her best clothes. Ruth would put on her most attractive dress. She was supposed to dress to impress. And when her makeover was complete, Ruth wouldn't be wearing a dirty old brown garment that she would use to glean the fields. She'd be in the closest thing she had to a party dress. She would look fantastic and smell great. Naomi then tells Ruth to go to the threshing floor secretly to meet Boaz. And the threshing floor was the place where the grain was separated from the harvested wheat. The wheat stalks were crushed on the threshing floor either by hand or by oxen. And crushing the stalks would separate the valuable grain from the chaff. And then they'd toss the crushed wheat in the air. The threshing floor was often located on a hill so that the wind would blow away the lighter chaff. What remained was the good grain. She was to go late at night, after Boaz had finished eating and drinking. Now remember, this is the time of the harvest. It's a time of celebration. So, Boaz may have eaten some fine food and drank some fine wine, and he may have been a little happy. And Boaz would be asleep at the threshing floor. It was common for the men to sleep at the threshing floor to prevent thievery. So Boaz would be curled up with a blanket at the threshing floor, sleeping beside his grain. And Ruth was to tiptoe up to Boaz as he was sleeping, uncover his feet, and lie down at his feet. And by uncovering his feet, Boaz would be sure to wake up, because nobody likes to sleep with cold feet. But again, looking at this story through modern eyes, it looks quite seductive. It looks like Ruth is getting all glammed up to secretly join Boaz in bed at midnight. It really looks like an episode from the TV show The Bachelor. When the bachelor on TV spends the night with a woman in the vanity suite, we have a pretty good idea what's going on. It's with those kinds of suspicions that we read the story of Ruth. It appears that Ruth is spending the night with Boaz at the fantasy threshing floor. But this really wasn't the case at all. Ruth was making herself as attractive as possible. This is true. But lying at Boaz's feet was clearly for the purpose of appealing to Boaz's kinsman obligation. Ruth was claiming Boaz as her kinsman redeemer. And how do we know that this isn't some tawdry affair? Well, first, because Naomi would never have asked Ruth to do something improper. She knew the kind of man Boaz was and trusted his integrity. So both Ruth and Boaz were of impeccable character. They didn't earn their reputation by having one-night stands. And they weren't so foolish to throw away their reputations for a night of passion. And Boaz wouldn't be the only person at the threshing floor either. It was a public place. Other harvesters would also be there, possibly even with their families. Now, this was Ruth following the customs of the day. At the very least, she was asking Boaz to be her kinsman redeemer, her protector. But it's also possible that Ruth was consciously asking Boaz to marry her. Ruth agrees to do everything that Naomi tells her to do. She puts total trust in Naomi, believing that Naomi has her best interest at heart. Verse 7. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." So in the middle of the night, Boaz's feet got cold. And as he goes to cover them back up, he notices that a woman is lying at his feet, and this startles him. And literally, the word translated startled means he was terrified. Boaz knew there was a girl at his feet, but he didn't know who she was or why she was there. And Ruth identifies herself and asks Boaz to spread the corner of his garment over her. And again, here's an ancient tradition that we don't practice in modern times. In those days, covering a girl with the corner of one's garment symbolized his intention to marry her. So Ruth makes her intentions clear, since she says to cover her, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. Verse 10. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. Once Boaz realized it is Ruth, he instantly goes from terrified to delighted. And Boaz is thinking, this is the best day ever. He realizes that Ruth, being young and beautiful, could go after any young, handsome, eligible man in Bethlehem, but she has chosen him. We are naive to think, in our modern times, that it's always the man who's the decider regarding marriage. It's true that in most cases the man is the one who proposes, but that doesn't mean that the woman doesn't choose her man. I know that in my case, Judy noticed me first. At a speech class at California Baptist College, she saved me a seat. And when I entered the door, she invited me over. She said, Greg, come sit over here. And that had never happened to me before. I was as startled as Boaz at the threshing floor. And soon, Judy invited me over to the dorm in order to give me a homemade cherry pie, since she heard it was my favorite. In other words, she chose me. She made it clear that she was interested in me. And I was delighted. And so was Boaz. Ruth had shown interest in him. She would like him to be her kinsman redeemer or more. But then there's a twist in the plot. Boaz tells Ruth that although he is a close relative of Naomi's, there's a guy in town that's even a closer relative. And so he would have first dibs at being Ruth's kinsman redeemer. Boaz had evidently already been mulling this over, thinking along these lines. He's already checked into the legalities of being Ruth's kinsman redeemer and husband. And although he realized that he wasn't Naomi's closest relative, he vowed to do right by Ruth one way or another. Now, Ruth must have had mixed emotions at this point. On one hand, Boaz was going to make sure that Ruth's needs were met, that she'd be cared for and protected. And if the closer relative was willing to do that for her, her future would be secure. But on the other hand, I believe that at this point, Ruth wanted with all her heart for it to be Boaz. He is the one that had shown such kindness to her. He is the one that everyone knew was this man of great character and faith. So Boaz tells her not to worry about it now. He'll take care of things. I believe Boaz was thinking the same as Ruth was. His first priority was to make sure that Ruth was cared for, but he was going to do it by the book. He had to defer to the near relative if that man chose Ruth. But Boaz wanted to be that man. He had obviously shown great interest in Ruth from the very beginning, and he could envision a great future with her. Boaz tells Ruth to stay the night. This was to protect her. He didn't want Ruth wandering the hills and the streets of Bethlehem in the middle of the night alone. But Ruth got up and went home very early the next morning so that she would not be seen by the others. Although she'd done nothing wrong, she didn't want to be the subject of idle talk and gossip. Verse 15. He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. So before Ruth leaves to go home, Boaz gives her a parting gift, 6 measures of barley. And the 6 measures were probably 6 seahs. And all this equals 2 ephahs, twice as much as she gleaned earlier. This would be about 60 pounds of grain. That's a lot to carry. So Boaz probably put it on her head, the way women would carry heavy loads in those days. Verse 16. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Naomi asks, "How did it go, my daughter?" This sounds just like a mother in the morning after her daughter's gone on a big date the night before. "How did it go last night?" So Ruth told her all about the evening. She told her how Boaz had woken up suddenly, about to have a heart attack. The two probably laughed about that. She told Naomi how Boaz was the perfect gentleman, not taking advantage of her and protecting her safety and her reputation. She told her also what Boaz said, that he would do right by her, but that there is another closer relative he needs to check with first. And then Ruth showed Naomi the 60 pounds of grain Boaz gave her. And Ruth said, "Boaz told me not to go back to my mother-in-law empty-handed." That was quite shrewd of Boaz, wasn't it? He's not only good to Ruth, he's good to her mother-in-law as well. Naomi knew that Boaz would follow through with the matter immediately. Boaz is obviously known as a man of his word. He would not rest until this matter is settled. He also is not a procrastinator. He is reliable and gets business done in a timely manner. Let's look at some lessons for life we find in this story. And the first is that God is always at work. Well, Naomi couldn't always see that. She'd gone from a pleasant, optimistic, happy person to a negative, bitter person. And for a time, she thought that God had just abandoned her. But he hadn't. And even on Naomi's darkest days, God had not left her nor forsaken her. So now Naomi was again beginning to realize that. She was beginning to see how God was weaving all of her life into something beautiful. The same is true for us as well. Life on earth is just hard. It's a daily struggle as we meet the challenges of darkness, disease, and death. And in the struggle, it's easy to be like Naomi, feeling abandoned and alone. But you got to remember that God is still at work. He was at work in Naomi's life, and he's still at work in our life as well. The second thing we see here is that God works in his way. Isaiah 55:8-9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Naomi couldn't understand why she went through such terrible things in her life. The famine in Bethlehem, the move to Moab, losing her husband and 2 sons in Moab, and as a result, ending up to be a poor widow with little hope. As she returns to Bethlehem, she says, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Naomi couldn't understand God's work in her life except to say that he had brought her misfortune and emptied her life and made her bitter. But now, her life's turning around. She has renewed hope. Her empty life is filling again with joy. But God hasn't changed. He's been working all the time through her life, through good and bad, to bring her to this point of renewal. We can't always explain the ways of God. His thoughts and ways are higher than ours, and that's what makes him God. But when hardship hits, we need to be more like Ruth and less like Naomi. Instead of falling into despair, we need to have eyes of faith, realizing that God works in ways we don't always understand. And the third lesson we see in this is that God works in his time. In his time, he brought the perfect couple together, Ruth and Boaz. There would be obstacles along the way. There would be details that need to be worked out. And so Naomi said to Ruth, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Naomi says, wait. Nobody likes to wait. Nobody goes to Disneyland and says, "Oh, good, the lines are really long today." We live in a day of overnight Amazon deliveries and instant Google searches. We want things to happen now. The quicker, the better. But the Christian life is all about timing, God's timing. And sometimes his timing seems kind of strange to us. But that's because God doesn't work with a clock or a calendar. He's a God that transcends time and space. Even when it comes to Christ's glorious return, God refuses to enter it on a calendar. Jesus said, "Keep watch because you do not know the day or the hour." Through the ups and downs of life, we've got to have patience. We need to trust God's timing, to keep waiting and keep watching and keep trusting, because he makes all things beautiful in his time.